My mother called me at 2:17 in the morning, and the first thing she said was, "Emily, please, we need you." I sat up in bed, confused and half asleep. I hadn't spoken to my parents in almost 8 months. Not after the last argument. Not after they had chosen my younger brother Ryan over me for what felt like the 100th time. For years, they had protected him, paid his bills, excused his mistakes, and blamed me whenever I refused to clean up his messes. They had told me that family meant sacrifice. Apparently, that rule only applied to me. But now, after years of calling me selfish and ungrateful, my parents were suddenly begging for my help. And the shocking part wasn't that they needed me. The shocking part was why they needed me. Ryan had managed to destroy almost everything our family had built, and there was only one person who could save it: me. My name is Emily Carter, and growing up, I learned very early that my brother Ryan and I were not treated equally. Ryan was 3 years younger than me. He was charming, funny, and extremely good at getting what he wanted. I was responsible. I got good grades. I worked part-time in high school. I saved money. I rarely asked my parents for anything. Ryan was the opposite. When he wanted something, he asked. When my parents said no, he asked again. When they still said no, he complained until they gave in. And somehow, he always got what he wanted. When I was 16, I saved for nearly a year to buy my first used car. I worked after school. I babysat. I cleaned houses on weekends. When I finally had enough money, I bought an old Honda. I was incredibly proud of it. Ryan turned 16 the following year. My father bought him a brand new sports car. I remember standing in the driveway when Ryan came outside and saw it. He screamed with excitement. My mother hugged him. My father handed him the keys. I stood there smiling. Ryan looked at me. Then he said, "Jealous?" I laughed. No. But I was. Not because of the car. Because nobody had ever celebrated my hard work like that. When I got into college, my parents told me they couldn't afford to help much. So I worked. I received scholarships. I took out a small student loan. I graduated with almost no debt. Ryan went to a private college. My parents paid everything: tuition, housing, food, books, even his spending money. When I asked my father about the difference, he said, "Ryan needs more help than you do." I asked why. He said, "Because you're responsible." That sentence stayed with me. Being responsible had become my punishment. The more capable I became, the less my parents thought I deserved help. After college, I got a job at a financial services company. I worked hard. I learned everything I could. Eventually, I moved into management. I bought my first house. It wasn't huge. It wasn't luxurious. But it was mine. I was proud of it. Ryan, meanwhile, had dropped out of college twice. He started several businesses. Everyone failed. My parents kept funding him. A restaurant, a clothing store, a car detailing company, a fitness studio. Every time, Ryan had a new idea. Every time, my parents believed him. And every time, I warned them. Stop giving him money he hasn't earned. My father would get angry. Don't talk about your brother like that. My mother would say, "He's trying." I would respond, "Trying isn't the same as being responsible." That usually ended the conversation. Then Ryan came up with his biggest idea yet. He wanted to open a luxury home renovation company. He claimed the market was exploding. He said he had connections. He said he had clients waiting. He said he just needed startup capital. My father loved the idea. He put nearly all of his retirement savings into it. My mother gave Ryan money from an inheritance she had received from her aunt. I told them they were making a mistake. My father said, "You always think you're smarter than everyone." I replied, "No, I just look at the numbers." He laughed. Ryan looked at me. You're just jealous because Dad believes in me. That hurt. But I didn't argue. I walked away. For the first year, Ryan's company appeared to do well. He rented a beautiful office. He bought an expensive SUV. He hired several employees. He posted pictures online of luxury kitchens and expensive houses. My parents were thrilled. My mother constantly told relatives that Ryan was becoming a successful entrepreneur. Nobody talked about me. I didn't care anymore. I was focused on my own career. Then Ryan asked me for help. He called one evening. Emily, I need a favor. I immediately knew what was coming. What kind? Can you lend me $20,000? I laughed. No. He became angry. Why? Because I don't lend money to businesses that don't have proper financial records. He said, it's family. I answered, that's exactly why I don't want money involved. He hung up. 2 days later, my mother called. She was furious. How could you refuse your brother? I asked, why should I give him $20,000? He needs it. So does every business owner. He's your brother. I said, Mom, that's not a business plan. She accused me of being selfish. I told her I was done talking about it. Then my father called. He said, you need to stop acting like you're better than Ryan. I said, I never said that. You don't have to say it. I asked, what do you want me to do? He said, help your brother. I replied, I already offered him something more valuable than money. I offered to review his finances. He laughed. Ryan doesn't need your advice. I said, then he doesn't need my money. My father hung up. 3 months later, Ryan's company collapsed. Not slowly. Completely. He owed suppliers. He owed employees. He owed contractors. He had unpaid taxes. And apparently, he had borrowed even more money from my parents without telling me. My parents lost almost everything. Their retirement savings were gone. Their house had a second mortgage. My father had taken out loans against several assets. And Ryan still owed hundreds of thousands of dollars. I found out through my mother. She called me crying. I asked, what happened? She said, Ryan made some mistakes. I said, what kind of mistakes? She didn't answer. Then I heard my father in the background. He shouted, don't tell her everything. I froze. Everything. My mother started crying harder. I asked again, what did Ryan do? My father grabbed the phone. It's none of your business. I said, you called me. He hung up. I didn't call back. For the next several months, I stayed out of it. I didn't want to be involved. I didn't want another argument. And most importantly, I didn't want my parents to use me as Ryan's emergency fund again. Then one evening, I received a letter. It was from a law firm. My parents were facing foreclosure. The house where I had grown up was at risk. I stared at the letter for a long time. I wanted to ignore it, but I couldn't. It was still my childhood home. So I called my father. He answered. I asked, how bad is it? He was silent. Then he said, we're okay. I said, Dad, I got the foreclosure notice. Silence. Then he said, we can handle it. I asked, can you? He didn't answer. I said, how much do you owe? He said, don't worry about it. I replied, I'm not asking because I want to give you money. I'm asking because I want to know the situation. He hung up. I didn't hear from them again. Until 8 months later. 2:17 in the morning. My mother's call. Emily, please, we need you. I asked, what happened? She started crying. Your father is in the hospital. My heart dropped. I sat up. What happened? Stress. His blood pressure went through the roof. The doctor says he can't work right now. I asked, what about the house? She said nothing. Mom, we're going to lose it. I closed my eyes. How much? She whispered the number. It was enormous. Much larger than I expected. I asked, where did all that debt come from? My mother said, Ryan. I already knew. But hearing it still hurt. She said, he used your father's property as collateral. I sat there silently. Then she said, please help us. I asked, where is Ryan? He's gone. What do you mean gone? He left. Where? We don't know. I couldn't believe it. My parents had spent years choosing Ryan. Now he had disappeared. And they were calling me. I asked my mother, why me? She cried. Because you're the only one who can fix this. I didn't answer. She continued. You've always been the responsible one. That sentence made me angry. I said, that's not a compliment anymore, Mom. She went quiet. I continued. You chose Ryan every time. I know. You gave him money when I told you not to. I know. You trusted him when I told you to check the numbers. I know. You told me I was selfish when I refused to keep funding his mistakes. I know. And now you're calling me because I'm the one who didn't destroy my life. She began crying. I felt terrible, but I needed her to hear the truth. I said, I love you, Mom, but I'm not going to rescue everyone without knowing what happened. She said, what do you need? Everything. She didn't understand. Financial records, loans, contracts, bank statements, everything Ryan touched. She said, okay. I hung up. The next morning, I drove to my parents' house. It looked different. The garden was overgrown. The paint was peeling. There were notices taped to the front door. My mother opened it. She looked exhausted. I hugged her. Then I walked inside. My childhood home looked like a stranger's house. My father was still in the hospital. My mother had been sleeping on the couch. I sat down at the kitchen table. Show me everything. She brought me boxes. Bank statements. Loan documents. Credit card bills. Business contracts. Tax notices. I spent the entire day going through them. Then I found something strange. A series of transfers from my father's account to Ryan's company. I traced them. The money hadn't gone toward business expenses. It had gone toward personal purchases. Luxury cars. Vacations. Jewelry. A house Ryan had rented under another company's name. I kept digging. Then I found something worse. Ryan had created several companies. He had moved money between them. He had borrowed against my parents' assets. He had signed contracts using their names. My father had unknowingly guaranteed some of his loans. But there was one document that stopped me. A property agreement. My parents' house had been pledged as collateral, and the lender had the right to take possession if payments weren't made. The foreclosure date was less than 30 days away. I looked at my mother. Did Dad sign this? She nodded. Ryan told him it was temporary. I closed my eyes. Mom, this isn't temporary. She started crying. I said, I know. Then I noticed another name on the document. The lender wasn't a bank. It was a private investment company. I recognized the company. I knew its owner. It was one of the investment firms my company regularly worked with. I immediately called my attorney. She answered. I explained the situation. She reviewed the documents. Then she said, Emily, don't pay anything yet. Why? Because something isn't right. She asked me to send her every document. I did. The next morning, she called. You were right to be suspicious. I asked, what did you find? She said, some of these loans may have been improperly structured. I didn't understand. She explained that several of Ryan's companies appeared to be related entities. Money had moved between them. Some contracts had questionable signatures. Some payments appeared to have been made without proper authorization. And there was evidence that Ryan may have misrepresented my father's financial position when securing loans. I asked, can we stop the foreclosure? She said, possibly. I asked, how? She said, we need to challenge the validity of some of these agreements. I immediately hired her. For the next 3 weeks, we worked nonstop. We contacted lenders. We reviewed contracts. We traced payments. We interviewed accountants. We examined emails. And slowly, the truth came out. Ryan hadn't simply made bad business decisions. He had been moving money. He had been using one loan to cover another. He had been hiding debts. He had been lying to my parents. And in some cases, he had lied to lenders. The worst discovery came from one of his former employees. The employee had kept copies of internal emails. One email from Ryan said, Dad will sign whatever I put in front of him. Emily won't help anyway. I stared at the message. My mother was sitting beside me. She started crying. I told her, Mom, this isn't your fault. She said, we should have listened to you. I didn't answer. Because she was right. The investigation eventually reached the authorities. Ryan was located in another state. He had been staying with a friend. When investigators questioned him, he denied everything. Then they showed him the emails. He stopped talking. My parents' foreclosure was temporarily halted. But their financial situation was still terrible. They had almost no savings. Their credit was damaged. They had huge debts. My father was still recovering. I had a choice. I could help them, or I could walk away. I chose to help, but not the way they expected. My mother thought I would simply write a check. I didn't. Instead, I created a plan. I negotiated with the lenders. I purchased some of the distressed debt through my investment company. I refinanced the legitimate obligations. I challenged the questionable ones. I sold several assets that my parents no longer needed. And I structured a repayment plan that would allow them to keep their house. It took months, but eventually the foreclosure was stopped. The house was saved. My parents didn't lose everything. Then came the conversation I had been avoiding. My father was home from the hospital. He asked me to sit with him. He looked older, much older. He said, I don't know how to thank you. I said, you don't have to. He looked at me. Yes, I do. I stayed quiet. He said, we chose Ryan. I nodded. We did it over and over. I said, yes. He continued. Even when you were right. I nodded again. My mother was sitting beside him. She was crying. My father said, we thought Ryan needed us more. I replied, he needed boundaries, not money. My father looked down. I continued. You didn't help Ryan. You protected him from consequences. My mother whispered, we know. I said, and every time you protected him, you pushed me further away. My father looked at me. I know. Then he said something I had never expected. I was jealous of you. I stared at him. What? He said, you didn't need us. I didn't know what to say. He continued. You built your own life. You made your own decisions. You didn't ask for permission. I said, so you punished me for being independent. He shook his head. I didn't realize that's what I was doing. I looked at him. That's exactly what you were doing. He started crying. I had never seen my father cry like that. He said, "I'm sorry." I believed him, but forgiveness wasn't immediate. I told him, "I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, but things have to change." He nodded. I gave him 3 conditions. First, Ryan would not receive another dollar from them. Second, they would never use my financial success as a reason to demand help. Third, if they needed help, they would ask honestly instead of making me feel guilty. My father agreed. My mother agreed. Then we waited. Ryan eventually faced serious legal and financial consequences for what he had done. My parents stopped defending him. That was perhaps the biggest change of all. For the first time, they let Ryan deal with the consequences of his choices. They didn't sell their house to save him. They didn't take another loan. They didn't call me. They didn't call anyone. Ryan had to solve his own problems. And he did. Slowly. Painfully. But he did. Years later, my relationship with my parents became much better. Not perfect, but real. My father started asking about my business. Not because he wanted money. Because he was genuinely interested. My mother stopped comparing me to Ryan. And she finally started telling people about my achievements. One day, I visited my parents for dinner. My father had prepared one of my favorite meals. We sat around the kitchen table. My mother looked at me and said, "Do you remember when we called you at 2 in the morning?" I laughed. How could I forget? She smiled. "I thought you were going to hate us forever." I looked at her. I was angry. "Are you still?" I thought about it. "No." She looked relieved. Then I added, "But I learned something." "What?" "That being the responsible child doesn't mean you have to become everyone's emergency plan." My father laughed. "That's fair." I looked around the kitchen. The same kitchen where I had spent years feeling like the less important child. Now it felt different. Not because the house had changed. Because I had. I no longer needed my parents to choose me over Ryan. I no longer needed to compete with him. I no longer needed them to admit that I was the better child. I had finally realized that there was no competition. Ryan had his life. I had mine. And my worth was never determined by how much attention my parents gave him. My parents chose my spoiled brother over me for years. They chose his comfort over my advice. They chose his excuses over my truth. They chose his potential over my achievements. And eventually, they paid the price for those choices. But when everything fell apart, they came to me. Not because I was the favorite. Not because I was the one they had treated best. They came to me because I was the one who had quietly built something strong enough to survive. And I helped them. Not because they deserved it. Not because I owed them. Not because I wanted to prove I was better than Ryan. I helped because I finally understood the difference between revenge and strength. Revenge would have been watching them lose their home. Strength was saving it without sacrificing myself. I didn't give my parents a blank check. I didn't rescue Ryan. I didn't erase the consequences. I simply gave my parents a chance to rebuild the part of their lives they had almost lost. And I made sure they understood one thing. I was their daughter. Not their bank account. Not their emergency fund. Not the person they could ignore until they needed something. Their daughter. The same daughter they had overlooked for years. The same daughter they had called selfish. The same daughter they had chosen last. And when they finally needed someone, I was the one standing there. But this time, I wasn't standing there begging to be chosen. I was standing there knowing my own worth. My parents once chose my spoiled brother over me. Then they begged me for help. And I helped them. But I never again allowed them to make me feel like I was second place in my own family.